The trade Boston can't escape, Jaylen Brown speaks, Mazzulla's seat heats up, and a shocking free agent rumor. Curious, Jaylen Brown just admitted something Celtics fans have been afraid to hear out loud. And it's not just about him and Jason Tatum, it's about what really happened behind closed doors this offseason. At the same time, a new report just linked Boston to a three-time All-Star with a personal connection to Tatum himself. Surprised, and on top of all of that, there's a real question being asked in Boston right now. Is Joe Mazzulla's seat getting warmer than anyone wants to admit? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly where this Celtics team stands heading into training camp, and it's more complicated than the record books will tell you. Welcome back to Celtics Daily Hub, where we break down the latest Boston Celtics news, rumors, and roster moves, so you don't have to dig through 15 different Twitter threads to find out what's actually going on. Today, we've got 4 major storylines, and they all connect to the same central question. Can this new-look Celtics team actually hold together? Let's get into it. I threw my phone against the wall. Jaylen Brown breaks his silence. Let's start with the story everyone's been buzzing about. Jaylen Brown, now officially a member of the Philadelphia 76ers, sat down for his first extended comments since the trade, and what he said is turning heads in Boston. Brown admitted that when he first found out he was being moved, his initial reaction wasn't calm or measured. He said he threw his phone against the wall. That's not the language of a guy who saw this coming and made peace with it weeks in advance. That's the language of a guy who felt blindsided. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Brown also opened up about his relationship with Jason Tatum, and he didn't pretend everything was perfect. He described their partnership as having real ups and downs over the years, which, honestly, isn't shocking for 2 alpha competitors who shared a locker room for a decade. But the timing of these comments matters. Just weeks after the trade closed, and with Brown now suiting up for the same franchise that eliminated Boston in the first round, every word he says is going to get dissected by Celtics fans looking for closure, or looking for someone to blame. What's confirmed here is pretty clear. ESPN's Shams Charania has reported that in the weeks leading up to the trade, Boston's front office had determined the current core simply couldn't win another championship together, and multiple reports indicate the Celtics were fielding calls on both Brown and Tatum before ultimately deciding Brown was the one who had to go. What's still uncertain is exactly how deep the tension really ran, and whether this was purely a basketball decision, or whether personal dynamics played a bigger role than Brad Stevens has ever publicly admitted. Think about the timeline here for a second, because it actually tells you a lot. Boston tried to put together a package for Giannis Antetokounmpo first, with Brown reportedly at the center of that offer, before Milwaukee instead worked out a deal with Miami. Only after that fell through did the Celtics pivot and go all in on moving Brown to Philadelphia. That sequence matters. It suggests this wasn't some long-simmering plan to specifically ship Brown to a rival. It was Brad Stevens working the phones aggressively, exploring every possible star swap, and eventually landing on a deal that reshaped the roster around Paul George instead. Brown himself has said he never actually requested a trade out of Boston, which adds another layer to this. If that's true, this was a front office decision made unilaterally, not a player forcing his way out. And that's exactly the kind of detail that fuels the kind of raw emotional reaction Brown described. Reports out of Philadelphia also indicate Brown was candid at his introductory press conference about the communication breakdown with Boston in the days before the trade, saying the two sides had barely spoken since. That's notable for a 10-year relationship between a franchise and a player who delivered a championship. Whatever the full story is, it's clear this wasn't a clean, mutually agreed-upon parting of ways. It was sudden, and by Brown's own account, it stung. And here's the twist that's making this even more interesting for Boston fans. Despite everything, Brown isn't burning bridges with the city. He and his sportswear brand 741 Performance just announced they're hosting a farewell block party in Boston on August 30th, calling it a thank you to the city that supported him for 10 years. It's a genuinely classy gesture from a guy who could have just walked away quietly, but it also means Celtics fans are going to get one more emotional reminder of the era that just ended. right as training camp is ramping up. Would you go if you're a Celtics fan? Let me know in the comments. But Jaylen Brown's comments and his goodbye tour aren't the only thing shaping the mood around this team right now. Because while Boston is processing the emotional fallout of that trade, there's a very real basketball question hanging over the franchisee, and it involves the man calling the shots on the sideline. Is Joe Mazzulla actually on the hot seat? Here's where things get interesting. Joe Mazzulla has one championship on his resume and a Coach of the Year award, but Boston's recent playoff history tells a rougher story. A blown 3-1 lead, a first-round exit against the very team Jaylen Brown now plays for, and a fan base that's grown increasingly impatient with how his rotations and in-game adjustments have looked when the pressure is highest. Now, with a retooled roster that no longer has Brown as a co-star, several outlets are starting to ask the obvious question out loud. If this season goes sideways too, is Mazzulla's job actually safe? To be clear, nobody serious is saying Mazzulla is getting fired before the season even starts. He's still got real accomplishments, and there's plenty of reasoning that this upcoming year should be viewed as a transition year rather than a referendum. But the framing from multiple Celtics-focused outlets has shifted. It's no longer how many rings can Mazzulla win. It's how much rope does he actually have left. And that's where Brad Stevens has a real decision to make about patience versus results. Especially with a city that expects contention every single year, no matter the circumstances. Let's put this in perspective, though, because Mazzulla's resume is genuinely strong. In 4 seasons as head coach, he's never won fewer than 56 games and has never finished lower than the 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. He won a championship in 2024, and he took home Coach of the Year honors last season despite Jason Tatum missing the first 62 games while recovering from injury. That's not a small accomplishment. That's a coach squeezing elite regular season results out of a roster that was, by most accounts, supposed to take a step back. The problem has never really been the regular season. It's been what happens when the lights get brightest. Boston has now lost a shocking number of playoff games as the favorite, and the collapse against Philadelphia, blowing a 3-1 series lead without Tatum for the deciding game, is still fresh in the minds of a fan base that doesn't have much patience left for near misses. Now factor in that this roster looks nothing like the one Mazzulla inherited. Gone is Jaylen Brown, the second leading scorer on a championship team. In his place is Paul George, a 36-year-old former All-NBA wing who's coming off an inconsistent, injury-affected stretch in Philadelphia and who was even suspended 25 games last season for violating the NBA's anti-drug policy. If George can't replicate anything close to his peak form, Mazzulla is going to be the one absorbing the blame for a rotation that simply doesn't have the same firepower it used to. Do you think Mazzulla deserves more patience given his regular season track record? Or has Boston seen enough red flags in the playoffs to start looking elsewhere if this season goes wrong too? This is where the roster situation becomes crucial, because how this team is built directly affects how much pressure Mazzulla is under. Boston's new-look frontcourt is about to test everything Mazzulla believes in. On paper, it makes sense, but there's a catch. Boston's frontcourt looks completely different now. The Celtics brought in Mitchell Robinson in free agency to man the center spot, while Neemias Queta remains in the fold on a 4-year, $56 million extension that runs through the 2030-31 season. That's a serious long-term investment in size and rim protection. Analysts are already pointing out that this new center rotation is going to test Mazzulla's system in a way it hasn't been tested before, because his identity as a coach has always been built around spacing, switching, and small ball versatility. Now he's got real traditional size to figure out how to use. And the roster building didn't stop there. Boston officially signed second-round pick Dillon Mitchell to a 2-way contract after he flashed serious defensive upside during Summer League, including a 6-steal performance in July. He's expected to spend the bulk of his rookie season developing with the G League's main Celtics, but his athleticism and defensive instincts have people in the organization genuinely excited about his long-term upside. Interestingly, there was even chatter that Mitchell could explore a return to college basketball after a federal court ruling opened up an extra year of eligibility for certain players. But signing the 2-way deal signals he's fully committed to starting his pro career in Boston right now. Beyond Mitchell, the Celtics also rewarded Ron Harper Jr. with a new contract this offseason, a move the organization has framed as validation for a player who's had to fight for every opportunity he's gotten in the league. It's a small story compared to the blockbuster headlines, but it says something about how Brad Stevens wants to build this roster moving forward, rewarding development and continuity at the margins while making the bigger swings at the top of the roster. With 14 guaranteed roster spots basically locked in and just a couple of two-way slots left to sort out, the Celtics roster for 2026 to 27 is essentially set. The pieces are in place. Now it's about whether they actually fit together and whether Paul George, who's taking up a massive chunk of the cap space at over $50 million this season, can stay healthy and productive enough to justify the return Boston gave up in the Brown trade. There's also a real financial wrinkle here that Celtics fans need to understand. Because of how the trade was structured, Boston took on more salary than it sent out, which hard-capped the team at the first apron for this season. That matters because it limits Brad Stevens' flexibility to make further additions unless he moves salary out first. George himself waived a nearly $4 million trade bonus, which helped ease Boston's cap situation slightly, and he's still got a player option worth over $56 million for next season, looming over the franchise's long-term planning. On paper, it makes sense to build around size and two-way size at center, while hoping George rediscovers his 2023-24 form, when he was averaging over 22 points a game on elite shooting splits. But there's a catch. George hasn't stayed consistently healthy in years, and if he struggles, Boston's front court flexibility this season is already tighter than fans might realize. We'll come back to how all of this fits together, because there's one more storyline that could completely change the shape of this roster before the regular season even tips off. The Bradley Beal rumor that has Tatum's fingerprints all over it. Here's the question every Celtics fan should be asking right now. Is Boston about to make one more move? According to Bleacher Report's Jake Fisher, the Celtics have emerged as a real potential landing spot for free agent guard Bradley Beal. Now, before anyone gets too excited, let's be clear about what this actually is. A rumor sourced to one NBA insider, not a confirmed signing. Beal is a free agent after opting out of a smaller deal, and his market has been quiet given his injury history and limited availability the last few seasons. But there's a detail here that makes this rumor more believable than your typical off-season noise. Beal and Jason Tatum are close friends, both products of the St. Louis basketball scene, and Fisher specifically noted that Boston shouldn't be ruled out because of that personal connection between the two. That's not nothing. Front offices and players talk, and when a star's inner circle starts connecting dots, sometimes that's exactly how these moves come together. Here's the real question, though. Would adding Bradley Beal actually help this team? He's only 33, but his body has betrayed him repeatedly over the past several seasons. He played just 6 games last year after a hip injury, and he hasn't topped 60 games in a season since 2020 to 21. At his peak between 2017 and 2021, Beal was one of the most dangerous scorers on the planet, earning 3 All-Star selections and twice averaging 30 or more points a night. That version of Beal is long gone, but even a diminished version could provide bench scoring punch that this roster genuinely lacks after losing Brown's shot creation. If Boston brings him in on a low-cost, low-risk deal, it's a reasonable, upside-only luxury add to a roster that already includes Tatum, Derek White, and Paul George. But if Mazzulla starts feeling pressure to actually play Beal significant minutes just because of his connection to Tatum, that's where it could get messy in a locker room that's already adjusting to life without Jaylen Brown. And there's competition to consider too. Reports indicate Miami has real interest in Beal as well, and insiders have suggested Miami might actually be the more likely, more desperate landing spot given how badly the Heat need proven scoring. Boston, by contrast, isn't operating from a position of desperation. This remains speculation and nothing is close to official, but it's a name worth watching closely over the next few weeks as free agency winds down. Would you want to see Beal in a Celtics uniform, or does his injury history make this a pass for you? So here's where this Celtics team actually stands as training camp approaches. Jaylen Brown is gone, but he's not gone quietly. His comments about the trade and his farewell block party are going to keep this storyline alive well into the season, especially with Philadelphia and Boston set to face off multiple times this year. Joe Mazzulla is entering the season with real questions about his job security attached to his name for the first time in his head coaching career. And how this retooled roster performs early will shape that conversation fast. The frontcourt overhaul with Mitchell Robinson and Neemias Queta, plus a promising two-way signing in Dillon Mitchell, shows Brad Stevens is building for size and depth in a way this team hasn't had in years. And the Bradley Beal rumor, however speculative, is a reminder that Boston's roster might not even be finished evolving yet. Which of these four storylines matters most to you as a Celtics fan? Is it the emotional fallout from the Jaylen Brown trade, the pressure building on Joe Mazzulla, the new frontcourt identity, or the possibility of Bradley Beal joining forces with Tatum? If you're a Celtics fan and you want the latest Boston news, rumors, and roster updates, make sure you're subscribed to Celtics Daily Hub. And let me know in the comments which of these four developments matters most for Boston heading into the season.